our invitation to join us. And so it's a great honour and a privilege to have John with us. He's a very, very busy man. He's all over Canada and the US and other parts of the world, delivering speeches and presentations to all kinds of sports groups. So again, we're very privileged to have John with us. John is the founder of Changing the Game project. Some of you may have read John's best-selling book, The Parent's Guide to Raising Happy, High-Performing Athletes and Giving Youth Sports Back to Their Kids. John's writing has been featured in many publications, including the Huffington Post, Soccer America. John has also spoken at TEDx, NSCAA Coaching Association Conference, IMG, and as I mentioned, all over Canada, the US, and Europe. John is an accomplished soccer player and coach, so he covers all facets of the game. John was a player at Fordham University, team captain, member of the 1990 Patriot League Championships team. He had a stint playing professionally with Wilmington Hammerheads at USL, and began his coaching career at the varsity boys soccer coach at Cardinal Gibbons High School in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was assistant men's and women's coach at the University of Vermont, and then delved into the world of youth soccer. John's also worked as the director of coaching in Vermont, Ann Arbor Youth Soccer Association in Michigan, and most recently executive director of Oregon Rush Soccer Club in Bend, Oregon. And that's where John is joining us from tonight, Bend, Oregon. So on that note, John, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'll just take a second here and change the presenter. And we're good to go. Okay, John?
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we're good, John.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being on. And I want this night to be about you all as well. And so I know that on the webinar, there's a place to ask some questions. So if you have any questions as we're going along, type them in. If there are things that Bobby and Carl can answer, they're going to answer them for you. And if there's a couple other ones, when we have some time at the end, we'll see how many of them we can get through as well. So please ask questions because this is a really important topic. And what we're going to talk about here tonight is creating an early engagement model in youth soccer. And what is an early engagement model, and how does an early engagement model differ from an early specialization model? So we're going to talk about those differences, talk about why I think an engagement model is better than a specialization model, and talk about different ways that you can transform soccer in your club or your community and promote this type of model, which I believe will help grow the game faster, create not only a next generation of players, but the next generation of fans. So basically, Bobby kind of covered a little bit about me. Have coached on every level. I've sat in every seat that you guys sit in as a club director, as a team coach, as a youth coach, as a college coach. I also got a stint working for the Portland Timbers as well. So kind of seen players at all levels, and I met a lot of you also in 2015 back in March at the OSA meeting. So diving right in here, what I want to talk about tonight is, how do we best develop young players? We all want our players to perform their best and do their best, and there's really sort of two pathways that you could do this. One is this specialization pathway, and the other one is this pathway of early engagement. Now, I get asked a lot by people because I talk about a multi-sport approach and how kids should try lots of sports and find the ones that they like. And people say to me, oh, but in the sport of soccer, in the sport of football, the best players in the world come from an early specialization environment where that's all they do. And I think this is a little bit of a misconception, because what I truly believe is that the best players in the world come from an early engagement environment. So let's kind of look at the difference between those two things. When we talk about early specialization, we're talking about an environment that is very much about the adults. It's adult-centered. highly organized. We have lots of coaching. We have lots of organized games. We have lots of cones and very specific drills and lots of things without the ball. And one of the big things to understand about early specialization is that it's very long-term focused. So the reason that you specialize early is so that you will have this long-term ability, this idea that I need to get thousands and thousands and thousands of hours to be very good. And what happens in this environment is oftentimes enjoyment or the moment becomes secondary to, development and these long-term goals. And what happens is we have lots of issues that arise from that, because oftentimes this early specialization environment is about the needs and the values and the priorities of the adults, be they the coaches or the parents looking long-term, instead of the needs and values and priorities of the children playing, who are short-term thinkers, right? Children think short-term. They're about the moment. If the moment's not fun, they don't want to do it much anymore. And so this is one of the reasons why I think this is a very damaging environment sometimes. Now I just want to kind of cover some of the issues in this, and these are all lots of science on this of what happens in early specialization environments. And certainly Canadian Sport for Life is a world leader in the long-term athletic development model and listing some of things, and is a big advocate for this multi-sport approach prior to the age of 12. And the reason are as follows, right? The physical issues. Children who specialize in one sport at a very young age are 70 to 90% more likely to get injured than children who play multiple sports. They have psychological issues. They're far more likely to burn out and drop out and quit. And the psychological issues, what we would call identity issues. So kids who specialize in sports are very much more likely to become so intertwined in those sports that it's all about, I'm no longer John, someone who plays soccer and does all these other things. I'm John, the soccer player. And so what happens is when I'm John, the soccer player, my whole life revolves around this and all my friends revolve around this. Well, when I get hurt, or if I don't make the team, or I start playing poorly, what happens is that affects the whole rest of my life, because my whole entire identity is attached to me being this soccer player. So what the psychologist tells us is that this is a very dangerous thing. We need a much more balanced approach. The other thing that this early specialization environment creates, especially here in North America, so in the US and in Canada, is financial barriers to play. I mean, let's face it, we have a pay-to-play model. And the kids who are the best kids end up paying more money to do more things, and this creates barriers. I used to live in Michigan, and I thought it was bad enough there when I lived there when, quote, travel soccer started at 9 years old, or U9. Well, now it's U7. And there's other states that have this too. So when we think about creating a model where a 6-year-old soccer player might have to pay $1,000 to play with the other good soccer players, might have to commit to a year-round program, we're creating barriers to play. We're not growing the game. Because what we're doing is we're forcing families to make decisions about money that they're probably not ready to make with a 6-year-old or 7-year-old. And I think we force great players out of the game. And this is one of the big differences when people are comparing Europe or South America, is this apples to oranges difference of, there are no financial barriers to play there. The best players get to play for free. Whereas here, the better you are, the more you pay, the more you travel at these really young ages. So we have these commitment issues. People don't want to commit to year-round programs. And when we have these, we also have this focus on results. It becomes very results-oriented. If I'm going to pay all this money and I'm going to make this big commitment, well then, how am I going to judge how my child is doing? And sadly, very often it becomes more a focus on, well, how many wins and how many losses do we have versus how is my child developing? And I think we all know, especially in the game of soccer, that when you're very results oriented at young ages, when you're trying to win at age 9 or 10 or 11, that's a very different thing than preparing players to win at 16, 17, 18 or beyond, right? Take the fast kid up front, take the kid who can kick the ball a long way in the back, kick it over the top. If he chases down 8 a game, he'll probably score 3 or 4 and we'll win. But this isn't developing players. We're not teaching kids how to pass and move and playing combinations. We're just focusing on results. Now, the other thing it does is it doesn't create a place for the late bloomers in the game. So when we think about this idea of the relative age effect, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, the fact that in youth teams, especially prior to puberty, when we start picking all-star teams and making cuts, usually 40 to 50% of the kids are born within 4 or 5 months of that arbitrary calendar cutoff. And so the kids who are a little bit young for their age, the ones in a calendar year who might be born in November or December, who might have a great deal of talent but not the physical maturity to show it, they don't make these teams. They get left out. And what happens is, at far too young an age, they get left out of the entire developmental system. They don't get access to the good coaches, to the good facilities, to the good competition, and this is terrible for our game. The U.S. national program just announced something I just saw today, which I think is a really fascinating program, where they're calling them the Futures, and they're running special national team camps for the kids who are the youngest in the ages, because they realized our team here just qualified for the U17 World Cup, and 15 of the 20 on the roster for the World Cup are born between January and May. So only 5 players of the 20 are born in the latter 7 months of the year. And what U.S. Soccer is recognizing is that we need to create a place for these late bloomers, because oftentimes it's the late bloomers who become the best players down the road. And then finally, what I would say my problems with early specialization are, because it's so adult-centered, because it's so coach-heavy, we have this great fear of failure and lack of creativity for players. When a coach is always second-guessing decisions or making decisions for players, right? When we devalue free and open play and creativity and taking chances, when kids are afraid to make a mistake, when they're afraid to pass that ball or afraid to take that player on because they might get yelled at if they give it away, if not by their coach, then certainly by the sideline of parents who are wondering why they didn't shoot or why they didn't pass or why they're trying to dribble past 3 players. And this creates a lack of creativity. It makes kids afraid to make mistakes, and these things are not conducive to long-term player development. So let's contrast this with what I call this early engagement environment, or this early engagement model. Now, an early engagement model is what I would call child-directed. It's about the needs and the values and the priorities of the kids. It's about creativity, and it's an environment that we might call a freedom to fail environment, where enjoyment is primary to development. Players develop by playing, but they're also enjoying themselves while they're doing it, and it's an environment where they're going to do it more, because if they like it more, they're going to pick up the ball and play more. And I think I've never met a coach who has disagreed with this idea that if your players are going to be really good, they're going to need to pick up that ball and probably play more outside of organized practice than they're going to do within organized training. And an engagement environment supports that kind of thing. Kids who are engaged early, there's less physical issues because there's a lot more free play. There's less psychological and burnout issues because it's all about their needs and the things that they want to do. I think a great example in society today, kind of a sad one, is there is something that kids do these days that is an engagement environment for far too many kids, and it's called video games. And the last statistic that I saw was that the average American teenage boy plays 17 hours of video games a week. And so if you turn that around and said, how good would your players be if they played 17 hours of soccer a week or 17 hours of any other sport a week? They'd be very good. And when we think about the difference between these two things, right, what do video games do? It's about having fun. It's about enjoyment and what the kids want out of it. They own the experience. They're with their friends. They're playing. They're sitting with them on the couch, or they're online with them. There's no parents or coaches yelling at them for making mistakes. You know, the game tells them, well, you've made an error here because your character's dead or your car crashed or whatever. But they're not getting constant feedback from adults over what they're doing wrong and how they're messing up. And one of the other fascinating things about video game companies is they constantly ask kids, how can we make this better? Well, let's contrast that with youth sports all too often, which is owned by the adults, run by the adults and adult values. We split kids off from their friends very young instead of just letting them play. And we rarely ask them what they want out of this experience. And then we sit on the sidelines and we micromanage everything that they do. And so video games create an engagement environment for kids, and the evidence is pretty striking that that's what they want. And a lot of sports like skateboarding or snowboarding or things like that, these are an engagement environment, child to child. They figure it out, they make mistakes, they fall, but they learn, and they learn from each other. And I truly believe that this type of environment, and it can be created within our structures, within our clubs, but by backing out the adults and letting kids figure stuff out more, by playing more street soccer, by playing more 3v3 and 4v4. And we'll lessen the physical issues, we'll lessen the psychological issues, and really start valuing free play more. My friend Mark O'Sullivan from Sweden has this great quote. He says, we adults have so devalued free play right now that the kids are starting to believe that it's not important. But all the evidence and all the research points to how vitally important free play and child-directed play, where they're making the rules and they're figuring out, is to development, not only athletic development, but personal development as well. So here's why I think that kids really benefit from this early engagement environment. Autonomy. They own the experience. They enjoy the experience, and they're intrinsically motivated. And these three things, autonomy, enjoyment, and intrinsic motivation, are really the cornerstones of development, any achievement activity. If you want kids to do well, if you want them to play their best, if you want them to play their hardest, they need ownership, they need to enjoy it, and the motivation has to come from them. This environment also promotes creativity. It promotes fearlessness. It allows for individually paced development. And I think it helps grow the game, not only because we have more people playing the game, but we're developing lifelong fans of the game. When we're cutting kids at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old and telling them we don't have a place for you anymore, think about that. When we play a game, we coach a game that you can play into your 50s, maybe even your 60s. And yet we're telling 10-year-olds that, sorry, we don't have a place for you anymore. I think it's really detrimental, not because they might be your next national team player, but they can certainly be the one buying tickets and a fan, and then have the knowledge to coach their own kids 20 years from now and grow the game and grow the love of this game. So I think this is super, super important. This is why I think we need to create this environment. So when we look at the world's highest paid players and using how much we're paying for players as a measuring stick for their true value in the world, you'll notice on that list there's no center backs on that list. They're not, for all the center backs out there, including me, I'm not trying to devalue our contribution, but the world values creative, attacking, fearless, goal-scoring players. And on that list, aside from Fernando Torres, who just happened to land a great contract, look at those players. You have Neymar, Ronaldo, Bale, Falcao, Messi, Ibrahimovic, and Aguero. Look at these players. I'd add to this list Diego Costa. And if you look at the background that they come from, yes, did they eventually come through professional clubs? Of course. But they started on the streets. They started by playing futsal, especially all the South American players. They started by playing pickup. And they learned to dribble and take players on and be creative and be fearless in that environment first and foremost. Diego Costa at Chelsea now, a lot of people don't realize he's one of the next most expensive players. He played street soccer until he was 16. He was discovered playing on the streets at 16 years old. And he's one of the most prolific goal scorers in the world. And so we need to really look long and hard about this and say, these players aren't coming out of highly structured environments. Yes, when Messi got to Barcelona and Ronaldo at Sporting Lisbon and Bale at Southampton, yes, they're in a structured environment there. But the whole basis of who they were as players was really well established by that point. And so if these are the types of players we want to create, we have to create environments within our organizations where they can be creative and they can express themselves. And so what I want to talk about here for the rest of our time is how to build this early engagement model. What are 5 things that we can do that I think will really promote a model that will allow our kids to become more creative and become more fearless and give us a role as coaches that we are facilitators and we're guiding this to happen. We're not forcing it to happen. We're not making it happen. We're letting it happen. I did an interesting interview with a man named Raymond Verheyen, Dutch coach, coached in 3 World Cups, I think for South Korea, for Russia, and for Holland. Big part of the overhaul, the Feyenoord program that put half of the Dutch World Cup roster in Brazil this past summer. And one of the quotes that he said to me, which I find very, very interesting, is this. He says, technique in soccer is the execution of a decision. You never play the same pass twice. You never make that same run twice. You never dribble the same place twice. So technique is not standing there and locking your ankle and bending your knee and passing a ball. It's recognizing who to pass it to, how hard to pass it, where to pass it, when to pass it, where to go after you pass it. And all these decisions can only be replicated in an environment where those decisions are present. If we're just going to put kids in lines and say, you pass it here and you run to this cone, boy, does it look pretty in practice? Yes. But there's no decisions involved. And when we separate that decision from the technique, we're teaching a completely different game. And an early engagement model brings that decision back into the technique. So let's look at these 5 different components. End long distance travel prior to age 12, replace it with in-house academy-style programs where you're developing more kids, making game days all-inclusive, more grassroots coaching development, and an investment also in continuing parent education. So let's look at each one of these components now and see what they look like. So first one, why do we need to end long distance travel prior to age 12? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, when we're starting to travel all this, we're forming all-star teams, right? We're getting all the best players together as soon as possible. So we're cutting kids. We're taking them off teams. We're creating these barriers to entry because of the commitments and the costs it takes to travel. And then, of course, we're traveling a long way, which really, there's lots of families who can barely transport their kids to school, never mind an hour or 2 hours away for a game. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, expensive uniforms and high player fees and long distance travel, they don't make kids more competitive, they make adults more competitive. They make coaches have to justify those costs, and they make parents want a return on their investment. Now, I'm not saying there's not a place for this later on, but do we really have to do it at 7 years old, at 8 years old, at 9 years old? I mean, when we're talking about how to develop creative, attacking, technically competent players, well, that only comes from time on the ball. And so if you're thinking about time on the ball, let's compare a street soccer day where the kids show up the field 5 minutes before the game, or how we used to play when I was growing up. You go to the park and you meet your friends. 5 minutes, everyone arrives, you pick out teams, and you play. You play for 2 hours or 3 hours, and then you walk that 5 minutes back home. And there was your day. And so for 3 hours and 10 minutes, you spent 10 minutes traveling, a little time in the middle getting a break, but really 3 hours just playing. And I did this playing hockey, I did this playing soccer, I did this playing baseball, and this is development. This is time on the ball. Now let's compare that with travel soccer. Drive an hour to your game, arrive an hour to the field beforehand, start your warm-up half an hour before, lots of jogging in places without touches, without decisions. How many people's warm-ups actually require decisions versus just simple touches on the ball. Now you play your game, and during your game, you've got 14 kids in your roster and 8 or 9 on the field at a time. So at any given time, there's 5 or 6 kids sitting out. So let's say now of that hour game, the kids play 60% of that. So they play 40 minutes. And then an hour drive back home. So in the engagement model, 3 hours and 10 minutes of time, 2 hours and 45 minutes of play. In the travel model, 4 hours of time, 40 minutes of play. And so what we're looking at is basically spending 5 minutes of some other thing, be it sitting in the car or standing around getting ready, for every 1 minute of play. And so this is why I think that our emphasis on traveling at really, really young ages is really destructive to our game. Certainly is here south, in the United States, and I can't imagine it's any different there as well. So what do we do? I think we have to replace that with local competition. And I think the best way to do this is truly creating academies of player, pooling players by their age and their ability, and have freedom of movement within this pool of players. So kids can move up and down, and they're playing against some days kids who are bigger, stronger, faster, and next day they're playing against kids who they're bigger, stronger, and faster. They can have great success one day and great struggle the next day. But what you're doing is you're taking your best coaches and you're developing all your kids instead of just the select 12 or the select 14. In this environment, right, playing more futsal, and certainly the South American futsal culture outside of the organized 11v11 soccer is a big part of their great player development. A lot more 3v3, a lot more changing game formats. I think creating just season by season commitments rather than saying, all right, if you want in our travel model, if you want in, you got to pay this fee and you got to commit for the whole year. Well, why not create environments where kids want to come back? Why not create places where it's not, hey, come on for the summer. If you like it, come on back in the fall. You like that? We're going to do something in the winter. Is this harder to organize? Yes. Does it look great on our budget sheet at the beginning of the year? No. But this is a model that will allow us to see the best athletes. Maybe you got a great hockey player who will play soccer in the fall if he can just play in the fall, but if he has to commit for a full year, he might not sign up, he might not come back. And then when we replace things with local competition, with academy formats or just a game day once a month, right, we take the focus off results. We allow our best coaches to work with more players instead of just assigning them to a team. It lowers burnout because it's far more enjoyable and there's far more just game time. And it promotes this love of the game. And I think this type of competition will help you develop a lot more players, will let them go through puberty, and then you'll see what happens at the other end. But only developing a few players technically, letting them grow, and then realizing that, well, a third of those kids aren't athletic enough to play at a high level, that's a pretty bad thing. But developing 60 kids, letting them go through, and then having, 60 technically competent players who grow and develop, and now we look at their final body, you can certainly pick 18 out of that group to play at a pretty high level. So that's number 2. Number 3, along with this, is at these youngest ages, making game days all-inclusive. Now, one of my problems with highly structured leagues is they promote large rosters of players, right? We're playing 8-a-side, and we have 14 players on our roster because that's what the league will allow us. And if we have some injuries or kids not there, well, we can't replace them, so we need to take as many kids as possible just to cover for that. So think about what that looks like on game day, right? It's less playing time. And I think this is a huge problem. I think it's perhaps the most ignored problem for our young kids today is on any given Saturday, on any given Sunday, while kids are, quote, playing their games, how many kids are sitting out? How many kids are sitting on the bench instead of playing? Would we not develop players better? Would we not develop more players that instead of playing 8-a-side with 6 subs per team, if we played 2 cross-field 6-a-side games and had only 2 subs, and now in that hour of play, basically kids are playing for 50, 55 minutes instead of for 40 minutes or 30 minutes? Think about how it takes the focus off the result and, well, did we win, and instead of did we get better, when you have 2 games going at the same time. And yes, parents can watch their kids, and yes, the coach has to watch 2 fields, but it's not about, oh, well, we beat that team or we didn't beat that team. It's about, hey, we played, and we played hard, and we did the things that mattered. So I think all-inclusive game days, this is not that there's not a place for something more competitive, that there's not an event that you might say, okay, we're going to play 8-a-side here, but it can't be every day. It can't be every weekend. It can't be game after game, all the games year long, having full rosters of kids sitting out. I just don't see how that truly develops it. And the more structured our leagues are, the more structured it is, saying, okay, we have to play this game because we're keeping standings in this 8-year-old league. It just promotes big rosters and kids not playing, and I don't see how that grows the game. Number 4, and this is a huge one for me, and I know this is a huge one for Bobby and for Carl, is the massive need to invest in grassroots coaching development. Now, the statistics here in the U.S., and I can't imagine they're any different in Canada, is that 7 out of 10 kids are out of organized sports by the age of 13. And when we think about that, certainly here in the United States, the numbers are pretty staggering. We have about 20% of all U.S. 6-year-olds play soccer. And by the age of 12, that's down to 13%. So basically from day one, when we sign them up, we start losing kids. And how many of those kids do we lose before they ever get to work with a certified coach, a great coach? Not someone who necessarily just played the game, but actually understands children and understands what makes them tick and why they do things. I do these coaching clinics and talks for a lot of recreational coaches, and man, they're so enthusiastic and they're so into what they're doing, and it's great. But then they ask me, well, the 6-year-olds, well, this is the practice I use to make sure that they don't all bunch up together. And so I tell these kids that they're not allowed to run past this cone and you're not allowed to run past this cone. And this is what they think is helpful, because they don't understand that, well, you know, with a bunch of 6-year-olds, if you put them in your living room and gave them one toy, they'd fight over that toy. So if you're going to put one ball out there, they're going to fight over that ball too. So we need to invest in coaching development. We need to help these grassroots coaches not only understand how to organize a practice better or how to stop a play or how to make a coaching point, but even beyond that, we need to help them understand how to create practices and use activities that replicate games, to coach Socratically, to have random play where kids are experiencing things they might see in a game over and over and over, and they're making those decisions that the game requires. Not standing in the lines, not running from one cone to the next with no decision involved, but making decisions, seeing things happen over and over. And we also need to invest in grassroots coaching development where we're helping these coaches understand kids and understand the tremendous impact that they have on kids. I know that I coached 10 years before I realized that the words that I used and the things that I said and the actions that I took could stick with a kid forever. And that I didn't get to pick and choose what they remembered or what impacted them. And that was a really scary moment for me, because I started thinking about all the kids I wasn't a good coach for, that I might have destroyed their confidence, that I didn't build them up, that I didn't teach them because they weren't helping me win at that moment. And I think we have to help our grassroots coaches to understand this. We have to help them understand that when you sit a kid on the bench and you don't let him get in the game because you're trying to win it, that kid's going to walk away. He's going to quit. Because the reason that kids stay in sports is because they get to play and because it's fun. And when they're asked to define fun, of a list of 81 characteristics, winning comes in at number 48 on that list. It's not why kids play. They love to play. They'd rather play on a losing team than sit on the bench in a winning team. But I think a lot of our grassroots coaches, they don't understand this, and they feel pressure from parents, and they feel pressure from themselves. Their competitive spirit gets up, and, well, I got to win, and so I'm not going to put this kid in because he's not going to help me win. And this is incredibly damaging, and this is why so many children walk out of sports and walk away. And again, oftentimes it's these young ones. It's the late developers. It's the kids who are not quite as big or fast or strong, who can't hang at these young ages. But they will be later on, and we have to keep them in the game. So we have to do more to help our young coaches out in our clubs. And for those of us who are on here and are likely experienced coaches in running organizations, we can't just pay lip service to a clinic. Can't just hand out a PDF before a game and say, okay, here we go. We have to do more at the young ages to get these guys help and get these women help, to recruit more women into coaching and really just do a much, much better job from those ages of 6 to 12. And then the last piece that fits into that is this idea of investing in continuing parent education as well. I believe that athlete development is a three-legged stool, let's call it. And there's the athlete, and there's the coach, and then there's the parent. And far too often, the parent is ignored. Where the parent is told, don't call me, don't email, don't write, don't ask questions, don't ever question anything that I do. And I think that's a mistake, because when it comes down to it, I think parents are the most influential person in a child's life. And why not have them help you to develop players rather than hurt you? So I think we often assume that because we hand out a code of conduct or hand an article, that all the parents are going to be good. But I could go to any sideline, any field, any weekend, anywhere, I guarantee you within 10 minutes I'm going to find parents behaving badly. Some of them not even realizing that they're doing it. Not even realizing that when you're shouting instructions out on the field when you're telling kids to run or to shoot or to pass, you're stealing their autonomy, you're stealing their ability to make decisions. And they think that they're helping, but they're actually hurting. See coaches doing the same thing when you're micromanaging your players and you're saying, step here, move in here, move out here, instead of saying, where should you be now? Where can you go? These are the things that we have to teach parents, that this actually hurts player development. It makes kids scared. It makes them afraid to make mistakes because they don't want to get yelled at by the parents. Because they have to make a good, try to pass that defensive midfielder, and it might get stolen, and the other team might score. But the next time they get the ball, they need to try to do that again, because it's the right pass, just maybe wasn't hit well. And so what I see far too often is coaches who don't communicate with parents and organizations who don't educate parents. Not one time, not one seminar or one article or one code of conduct, but it's an all-time thing. Just like if you want your team to be good at possessing the ball, you practice it over and over and over. Well, if you want your parents to behave well and know how to support their kids and know how to support their coach and know what to say and what not to say and how to be quiet on the ride home and how to not coach from the sidelines, it's not a one-time thing. It's an all-time thing. But what I do know is that organizations that invest in continuing parent education produce better players. They grow. They have higher numbers. They have sideline cultures that people want to be a part of. They have parents who help and volunteer more because everyone's part of the player development process. And are you still going to have problem parents? Yes. Sadly, there's no way to get rid of all of them. But if you can create cultures on your sidelines that make it far easier to be that good supportive parent than the one who screams at referees and yells at players and yells at opposing players and second guesses the coaches, if you can create a culture on your sideline where the other parents say, hey, that's not how we do things here, think about how it would be to coach that team. Think about how it would be to run that club. And so one of the things I say, with the Change in Game project is this is what we do. We do these seminars, and I talk to clubs, and these club directors tell me, oh, well, we don't have any money in our budget for parent education. And my question is, well, how much of your time do you spend dealing with parent issues, with teams that are being torn apart and cliques and politics and all that? And they say, oh my God, it's like half my day dealing with that. And I say, so great. So in actuality, you're already investing $30 or $40 or $50,000 a year, whatever half of it is that you get paid to run this club. You're already investing that in dealing with parent problems. Why not invest some of that up front in solutions and prevent it from happening so you can actually lead your club and run your club? So we must invest in continuing parent education. That's number 5. And here's why. Here's what I think this looks like. If we have this environment with less travel and less barriers to entry, we have an environment with more academy-style play where our best coaches are seeing more kids and better kids, and if we have an environment where game days include far more players and that the hours are spent playing instead of traveling and sitting on the bench and warming up and all that, if it's just more play. If we invest in coaching education so they know how to create that environment, and if we invest in parent education so they know what to do on the sidelines, so they know how to help their kids outside of practice, then I think in only a couple of years you'll start to see the difference. You'll certainly see more technically developed players to choose from for your higher level teams, for your senior teams. We'll see lower burnout rates because it's a much more fun place to play. It's a much more fun environment to be in. It's not adult-centered. It's not highly critical. You're not afraid of making mistakes and getting yelled at. You'll see more motivated players who want to play. We'll certainly create more fans of the game. Even those players who don't play at a high level in high school or college or the pros, they become fans of the game. They can look back positively on their youth soccer experience and say, man, this was something that was was a great part of my life. And yeah, I didn't play at the next level, but boy, I love this game, and I play in the indoor league, and I play in the adult league, and I can't wait to sign my kid up when I have kids to play soccer, because I love this game. Can't wait to go to MLS games and professional women's game and the World Cup this summer. Can't wait to watch the game on TV. And this is the growth of the game. I think one of the biggest ways that we'll get better, we'll get more competitive in Canada and the US is by growing the game and having more people play and having more people understand it. And so in all, my final thought is this: an early engagement model serves the kids and it serves the game. An early specialization model serves the adults first, and it drives far more kids out of the game than keeps in it. It creates far more barriers to entry, be they financial or commitment-wise, and there's no scientific evidence that it produces better players in the long run. But when we look at, again, the list of the highest paid players in the world, we see players coming from an environment that is an engagement environment where culturally and spiritually and physically they fall in love with this game. And if we can create that in our own clubs, if we can create that in our own cities, our own communities, our game will grow and will produce better players because of it. So I think we have plenty of time here for some questions. I just can leave this slide up. There's all my contact information for people who want to get a hold of me. My website's changingthegameproject.com. Twitter is @CoachJohnnyO. Facebook, just look for Changing the Game Project. There's my direct email if you have any questions or anything like that. And then because of my partnership with Ontario Soccer, and I love the work that Carl and that Bobby are doing there, you can get a free ebook, a free PDF of my the best-selling book, Changing the Game, and just go to changingthegameproject.com/free book for coaches, and you can join my email list there and get a copy. And then also, I run a program once a year called Coaching Mastery, and it's going to start here in June. And it starts with 3 free videos where we delve into, in one of them, the psychology of player performance, and another one we dive deep into how we deal with parents and conflict resolution, and the third one is all about building a culture of excellence and what we do on our teams and in our programs to build sustained excellence. And that's completely free. So if you get a free book, you'll be on my email list, and you'll get an email so you can sign up for that free video series. And if you enjoy that, then join our full course, which will start in mid-June. So that's it for me. And do we have any questions?
John, just before you go, Bobby.
Yep.
John, can you hear me? It's Bobby Lennox.
Yeah, I can hear you. You got me?
Yeah, John, we have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's a question from Eric. And Eric asked the question, John, at what age should we consider specialization in a sport?
Great question, Eric. So back in Philadelphia, and again, I think it's important to differentiate. A kid can certainly have one favorite sport from a very young age, right? They might just love soccer, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't do other things. And back in Philadelphia at the NSCAA convention, there was a man named Tony Strudwick there, who's the physical fitness coach for Manchester United. Was under Sir Alex for many, many years with the first team. Now he's down with the academy kids, and he put right up on a slide there that he believes that kids should play more than one sport up until the age of 12. So they can certainly say soccer is my sport, but they need to do other stuff. And what they do at Manchester United, what they do at Ajax, what they do at a lot of clubs is they incorporate into their training judo and tumbling and gymnastic movements. Certainly in Canada, certainly in the United States, we have a lot of other sport choices that kids can participate in that will lessen burnout and develop all-around athleticism. But I certainly would say that a kid by the age of 12, 13, who wants to go all in on soccer, yeah, they can go all in. But things like yoga, things like martial arts, things like some tumbling in the off season are still an incredibly important part of building the type of athlete that is needed to play at the highest levels of the game. There is an athletic component that prevents injuries, and what Tony Strudwick from Manchester United was saying at the convention there was that there are, they have players who, because they didn't develop this all-around athleticism at young ages, they're hurt so often that they don't get the training volume needed to push through. So he said that they have players who would have made the first team at age 20 who won't make it till 25 or maybe not at all because they're constantly getting injured because their overall athletic development is not where it needs to be.
Thanks, John. Yeah, that was a wonderful presentation. I sat in that presentation at the conference and got a lot out of that. John, we had lots of questions, and Carol and I were able to answer most of them. And we got lots of kudos and thanks and congratulations for the presentation tonight. So by all accounts, it was very, very well received. John, on behalf of the Ontario Soccer Association, Carol Horton and myself, we thank you very, very much for taking the time and sharing your ideas and wonderful philosophy with us all here in Ontario. And we look forward to working with you again very shortly, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it, guys. It was an honor to be on.
Thanks, John, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, John.